Angela Rayner has introduced a new workers' rights bill, a proposal that feels like a nostalgic throwback to the 1970s. It outlines a utopian vision where employees are entitled to an absurdly short workweek, extravagant salaries, and extended holidays, all of which are completely unrealistic. However, among the many fantastical elements in this proposal, the most baffling was the so-called right to switch off. This provision sought to make it illegal for employers to contact their employees outside of working hours. Under this rule, managers would be prohibited by law from calling, emailing, or otherwise reaching out to their staff beyond business hours, regardless of the urgency. This is simply impractical for many industries, including journalism, where professionals must remain available at all times. I have personally had to be reachable 24/7 throughout my career. Many businesses operate in a manner that necessitates after-hours communication. What if an urgent situation arises? A manager should have the right to contact their employees when necessary. Angela Rayner's vision was soon met with a harsh dose of reality. The clause was swiftly abandoned after opposition from businesses, which deemed it impractical and absurd. Even within the government, key figures such as Chancellor Reeves and Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds, who, despite portraying himself as a legal expert, never actually qualified, recognized the flaws in the proposal. Following discussions with business leaders, the right to switch off was removed from the bill, marking yet another humiliating retreat for the Deputy Prime Minister. To discuss this further, I spoke with Andrew Allison, head of campaigns at Popular Conservatism. He pointed out that this was yet another instance where the Labour government's idealism collided with reality. Just as Keir Starmer was recently forced to reallocate foreign aid funds to defence, the government had no choice but to scrap this unrealistic workers' rights provision. Allison emphasized that businesses must retain the ability to contact their employees when necessary, especially in smaller organizations where flexibility is crucial. The idea that employees should never be contacted outside of their designated hours is simply out of touch with how modern businesses operate. In many workplaces, urgent issues arise that require immediate attention. While responsible employers typically avoid unnecessary after-hours communication, there are situations where it is unavoidable. This is a matter to be negotiated between employer and employee, not dictated by the government through legislation. Moreover, the proposed employment rights bill is filled with excessive regulations that burden employers. One of the most concerning aspects is the provision allowing employees to request flexible working arrangements twice a year, with legally mandated justifications for any refusals. This creates unnecessary red tape and discourages companies from hiring new staff. Some business owners have already expressed their reluctance to expand their workforce due to the bureaucratic complexities that come with such policies. How does this align with the government's so-called growth agenda? This isn't the only example of Labour's impractical policymaking. Consider Ed Miliband's extreme net zero policies, which create economic roadblocks rather than fostering growth. Meanwhile, Starmer appears willing to further entangle the UK in the costly Ukraine conflict. With dwindling American support, there is growing concern that Britain might soon bear the financial burden of the war alone. If the UK is expected to contribute billions to Ukraine, where does that leave our own economy and domestic priorities? Andrew Allison acknowledged that supporting Ukraine is important, but he questioned the effectiveness of unilateral financial commitments without strong backing from other European nations. The United States' reluctance to continue its involvement raises significant concerns about the sustainability of Britain's support. If Labour intends to allocate vast sums to this cause while simultaneously implementing burdensome domestic regulations, it raises questions about their economic strategy. The recent diplomatic failures also highlight the government's struggles. The chaotic handling of international negotiations shows a lack of strategic planning, reinforcing the idea that experienced diplomats should handle delicate matters behind closed doors before political leaders present final agreements. Instead, we see public mishaps that only weaken Britain's standing on the global stage. Labour's spending priorities are also worth scrutinising. Take the international aid budget, which is arbitrarily tied to GDP. If the economy grows, we are expected to give away more. If it contracts, our contributions decrease. This formula lacks logic. Shouldn't our spending be based on actual need rather than fluctuating economic metrics? Meanwhile, the primary duty of any government, the defense of the realm, remains underfunded. If defense spending requires an increase, it must be balanced by reducing expenditures elsewhere. The answer is certainly not higher taxes, which are already near historic highs. This is why the Labour government's approach is problematic. Their policies, though appealing in theory, often crumble when confronted with economic and logistical realities. Scrapping the right to switch off is a perfect example of Labour's idealistic policymaking being forced into practicality. Business leaders quickly made it clear that this policy was detached from reality. Employers cannot be legally barred from contacting employees during critical moments. It's a ridiculous concept that ignores the fundamental nature of work. This pattern of Labour's retreat from impractical policies will likely continue. The same fate may soon befall Miliband's net zero agenda, which demands astronomical spending without considering its economic impact. The Labour government initially set out with a vision of transforming Britain into a progressive utopia, but as they encounter the real world, they are forced to make concessions. They are learning, albeit begrudgingly, that governance requires pragmatic decision-making, not lofty ideals. The reality check Labour is experiencing should be seen as a positive development. If Keir Starmer continues to adjust policies in response to economic and business realities, then perhaps his government can be pulled towards a more practical path. However, it remains to be seen whether these adjustments are genuine acknowledgements of reality or mere tactical retreats to avoid immediate backlash.